might ban me for this song, hey, but this is how I'm rocking. Can't be trans cause it ain't real. They need a mental asylum. Say the truth, they look at me like I'm the one with the problem, but they mess with little kids. That's why pedophilia rising, but that's what happens when you give an inch to the gays, promoting sin instead of telling them they should change the ways. They make you wear a mask, you comply, that remind me of slaves. Got my order wrong at McDonald's, thinking you need a raise. I'm about to break the meter, two-way got my heater. Hey, I don't wear Nike, I only rock Adidas. Hey, I'm in the street, yeah, and mostly y'all just tweet us. Hey, and false teachers, so Bryson got a teal. If a man dress like a woman, then it should be a crime. If you impersonate a cop, then they gon' give you some time. Say you a queen, but all you do is twerk and show your behind. And people think you a 10, but you ain't worth a dime. You scared of COVID, but you around like...
Day.
Another nice day.
Yes, sir.
What are we debating here today?
Abortion?
Are we doing like the Roe v. Wade? Are we doing a moral argument? Or
I'd say we're probably just going to talk more about abortion because on Twitter, I think Zen Shapiro dropped something about like some fact about abortion. And I said, okay, well, 91% of abortions take place first trimester. He says, do you want to debate about it? And I said, yes. So I figure we're just going to talk about abortion.
Yeah, and I'm just happy to defend it, whether you support Roe v. Wade or if you support abortion for whatever reason it may be, bodily autonomy or whatever moral argument you put forth for the pro-choice or pro-abortion position, I'm happy to defend it. Yeah.
all right, well, we've got you both here. You guys can introduce yourself, and you guys can be off to the races. Go for it.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, my name's Alex Kirsch from the Alex Kirsch Project. I'm a Army retiree, truck driver, part-time, very, very small-time streamer, and just want to take this time to also give a shout-out, because I know they're watching, is to Queen Alexa and the rest of the political shit show. And I'll be defending the position on abortion.
Yeah, and I'm Zen Shapiro. I'm a paleo-conservative. I am also known as the pro-life steel man. I'm pro-life in all regards. That's my main topic to debate. I'm also the in-house right-wing debater on the Crucible YouTube channel. I have my own YouTube channel as well. Just search up Zen Shapiro. You can also follow me on Twitter. And yeah, and also I appreciate you having me back on here, Destiny. So I'm ready to go.
All right, well, anybody want to start? I don't know what your guys' Twitter arguments were. I didn't see it.
Do you have an opening statement, Zen?
I mean, I'll just be quick. Yeah, I'm pro-life. Human life begins at conception. Abortions are killing innocent human beings. You could also call that murder. That's wrong. I oppose that. And I'd like to hear your argument on how you justify it.
Okay. I'll be as quick as I can with my opening statement. So for starters, it's very easy for someone like myself to have this discussion, just like my opponent and the moderator. However, we all share one thing in common. None of us are ever going to carry a baby to term. We can, however, have an opinion on the matter. For starters, I'm a firm believer that a woman does have, in fact, a right to choose. This does not necessarily make me a pro-abortion. This just means I say a woman does have a right to choose. I will explain throughout this debate why, and regardless of our idea of whether it's moral to terminate a pregnancy or not, one thing I must make absolutely clear. I don't want to get into a discussion about a variety of moral equivalencies. For example, I don't want to have a discussion about if I condone abortion, that means I also condone something like necrophilia, for example. It's a false equivalency and has no basis in this debate. I also don't want to get into a game of definitions. For example, if I mention the word sentience, I don't want to spend 20 minutes talking about it and different examples of it. My opponent may try to shift the goalposts to look for some level of consistency or inconsistency to prove his point. Our goal here should be to talk about one thing, talk about abortion, Roe v. Wade, a woman's right to choose, whether she truly does have a right to choose. Everything else, as far as I am concerned, is absolute nonsense. We have to stay focused on the topic we're discussing. That's why we're here. I will acknowledge that life does start at conception. This is scientific fact. My opponent may ask then if the child is considered an innocent life. Put it an end to that. The child is neither innocent or guilty of anything. To ask if it is innocent is an attempt to play a gotcha game. The concept of abortion or termination of a pregnancy isn't about innocence or guilt. Say it otherwise, it's intellectually dishonest. This topic isn't black and white, right or wrong, left or right. It's a very complicated issue, and to just break it down as innocent or guilty, to me, is just flat out lazy in my opinion. Sum up my opening statement, I just want to make myself clear. The majority of arguments I have heard from so-called pro-lifers has been the same thing over and over again. It's not her body. She's killing an innocent life. She could put it up for adoption, or she's just a whore for all of it. What's consistent about them, though, is they all know they do not know the circumstances of this mother to be. Based on their indifference, it is clear that they are not pro-life, but in fact pro-birth. Let's go and get started.
Okay, so I don't know if I actually heard your argument as to like why you support the woman's right to choose. Like what principle are you arguing here? Is it bodily autonomy? What is it?
It is bodily autonomy, actually.
Okay. So bodily autonomy, let's just make sure we understand the definition here. Bodily autonomy is one. Well, no, let's make sure we understand the terms we're using. Okay, that way we don't talk past each other. Fair? Yeah. Okay. So bodily autonomy, basically one's own right to self-governance, free of external coercion or compulsion. Fair?
Sure. Okay.
And you're saying you support the woman's right to choose to have an abortion on the grounds of bodily autonomy. Well, my thing is that that's actually contradictory because in order to be in support of bodily autonomy consistently, you would have to acknowledge the bodily autonomy of the human being inside of the womb, which you do acknowledge begins at conception.
Yes.
Okay, so then how do you rectify this?
Okay, so first off, why was the woman having the abortion in the first place?
We're talking about bodily autonomy first. Do you acknowledge the human life in the womb's bodily autonomy?
Why is she having the abortion in the first place?
I would imagine that changes from scenario to scenario, but they're largely They're largely due to convenience purposes, like probably more than 90% of abortions. But again, I want to stick to the bodily autonomy thing. Like, does the human in the womb have bodily autonomy, and if not, why not?
I would say that it does. It could have bodily autonomy, but I would say it doesn't all the way up until it's actually born, because at any given point, that baby could actually develop some sort of a medical condition that could actually put the mother's life at risk. So if we're going to talk about the purpose of bodily autonomy, right? Basically, what your argument is basically going to say is that, for example, if that baby develops, like, say, for example, mermaid syndrome. Are you familiar with mermaid syndrome?
Nope.
Okay. So mermaid syndrome, like, basically is for like it's an extremely rare congenital development disorder characterized by anomalies of the lower spine and lower limbs. Essentially, it's a condition that could actually put the mother at risk if she takes this baby to term, okay? So my argument essentially is that if this baby develops mermaid syndrome, okay, are you seriously going to sit here and tell me that that baby has more bodily autonomy than the mother does?
Okay, so you're referencing like what would be called medically necessary abortions, if you even want to call it an abortion. Yes. Well, those are, again, very fringe, rare edge cases, and we can talk about them. But generally, most pro-lifers, including myself, are not going to object to a medically necessary termination of a pregnancy. But if I'm not mistaken, you would be in favor of an abortion that is not medically necessary, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that's the 99.99%+ of abortions. So are you willing to defend that?
I don't think that's the 99.9%.
No, it is, and I'm actually just inferring this based on the pregnancy mortality rate. It's like 17 per 100,000, which is lower than driving cars in America, at least. So we're talking about 17 per 100,000 pregnancies results in death, and that's like, I think it chalks up to be about 800 per year in America. But there's 800,000 abortions per year in America, so we need to talk about the other 799,000. Which you are in support of. And I would imagine because you don't acknowledge bodily autonomy until birth, that would mean that you support abortion at any point for any reason all the way up to term on the grounds of bodily autonomy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the moment that it travels through the birth canal, it's no longer okay to kill, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So what's the significance of the birth canal here?
What do you mean by that?
Why is it that you are afforded bodily autonomy rights simply because you travel through the birth canal?
Because then at that point, the baby, essentially, like, once that baby passes through the birth canal, it's considered like a safe birth. We can agree on that, correct?
I mean, it's traveled through the birth canal safely. I mean, yes, but we're talking about why is this human life now afforded bodily autonomy?
Because we can all agree that we can all agree that at any given point, that birth can actually become very, very complicated due to a medical concern, which you just conceded that that's perfectly
in
okay.
Less than 1% of all cases. Yes.
It's not less than 1% of all cases.
Hold on, wait. I'm going to hijack this part. Okay. Both of you agree 100% that in the case of medically necessary abortions, you ought to be able to have one at any stage of the pregnancy. With the pro-choicer, I imagine saying it's a woman's right to choose to save her life, and with the pro-lifer saying this isn't even a contradictory position. You have to save one life for another. It's not even like like an anti-lifer, right? So we both can agree that let's never bring this up again, right? We both agree that that's a case. So let's move on to the elective procedures.
Here's what I like to know though, because like I seem to recall that Zen Shapiro actually said that he is against all kinds of abortions. Has he suddenly changed his position on this?
Well, that's why I say, like, in terms of a and I know Destiny wants to move on, and I do too, but in terms of like a medically necessary termination of a pregnancy, I don't call that an abortion, because I think when I hear the word abortion, I'm talking elective abortions for convenience purposes. But I do, like I said, I myself and any or most pro-lifers would agree, like in a medically necessary situation where the mother is going to die, that terminating the pregnancy is fine. It's justified. I mean, it's not good, but it's like you got to do what you got to do to save a life or whatever. So yeah, we can move past this because you support it otherwise. So I want to know, like, why do you support it when it's not medically necessary? And that's why we're talking about bodily autonomy. That's your principle here.
Yeah, well, because first of all, because at the end of the day, it has absolutely nothing to do with any of us in society, correct?
I don't know what you mean by that.
What a woman does with her, well, it's pretty clear. If a woman has an abortion right now, how does that affect you or I?
It's killing a human being.
Well, how does that affect you though?
Okay, so if a woman in I don't know, central Idaho got an abortion and I had no knowledge of it, no, that wouldn't affect me. But that doesn't mean that it's okay. Just like if a woman got raped in central Idaho, that wouldn't affect me. Doesn't mean it's okay, and it doesn't mean it should be legal. That's not an argument. Unless you would support rape in central Idaho because it doesn't affect you.
Here's the moral inconsistency with that argument right there. You are basically comparing two situations that have essentially nothing to do with each other, because one is a medical procedure.
No, they're linked because neither of them affect me.
Hold on. No, hold on. But here's where you're wrong though, okay? Because one is a medical procedure, correct?
I mean, sure. If you want to call it that, I wouldn't call it medical. I wouldn't call it a medical procedure. I would call it killing a human life. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, then you're denying science, because science indicates that it actually is a medical procedure.
What's the science that I'm denying?
To accelerate this, we could make a medical procedure where a doctor illegally operates on somebody to remove their heart.
Sure,
that would be a medical procedure.
Yeah, if we want to call it that, then fine. But the point here is, the analogy that I made is that neither scenario affects me. It's happening in central Idaho. I don't live in central Idaho. I don't know either party involved. Whether it's an abortion occurring or a rape occurring, neither one of them affect me, but that isn't a justification for either action. Whether they're good or bad, it doesn't make a difference. So it's not an argument.
Well, abortion's legal. Rape is not, correct?
Correct. Depending on where you are, but yeah.
Yeah, depending on where you are. But the fact of the matter is, like with Roe v. Wade, essentially that it was the law of the land that a woman could terminate a pregnancy. Essentially, well, they kind of changed the terminology over the years. They said that only under extreme circumstances, but they said there was no limitations for a first trimester abortion. I mean, we can agree upon that, correct?
Okay, hang on. I think we're getting away from this because we first started with bodily autonomy, and now you're bringing up like if it doesn't affect you, then just let it happen. I mean, which argument do you want to stick with? Because now you're moving to Roe v. Wade. Like, which argument do you want to stick with?
Well, it's all tied together, actually.
Well, okay, we need to take it one point at a time, though. You can tie things together as long as we establish the points as we go. So do you just want to focus on bodily autonomy for like 20 minutes, or do you actually want to if that's one of your core principles, then yes, I would love to address bodily autonomy. But you didn't seem to want to stick with that until we establish whether it's coherent or not. Would you like to do that, or would you like to move on to something else?
What more would you like to talk about?
Well, okay. So my question was, why is it that a human being is only afforded bodily autonomy after traveling through the birth canal, and they are not afforded bodily autonomy prior? So much so that they can be killed.
Okay, so like I had already stated before, for example, if a woman, like at any point, has this pregnancy, at any point, that pregnancy could actually put her in danger. This is basically why a woman should be able to have the right to choose. All the way until
hang on. No, because
wait, hold on. To be clear, to move past this, all of us agree with that. Every woman should have the right to quote unquote choose. Yeah.
But that's my point. That's my entire point, because a lot of the restrictions that are actually passing through the land right now is actually making it to where it's actually going to be more difficult for a woman to get an abortion, even if it's like medically necessary for her to receive an abortion. That's the point.
That's just not
Even
accurate.
if even if I'm going to move this a little bit, even if that was the case, I'm sure Zen would probably say if that was the case, that shouldn't be allowed. That there should be an option for a woman whose life is in danger because of an ectopic pregnancy or some other weird thing or some crazy birthing problem, that she should be allowed to have an abortion. I think we all agree up to the minute of birth or even after birth, if it's a fucking demon hellspawn child that's trying to murder the mom, you should be able to kill it. We all agree with that. I think that what we're trying to find is for the rest of the cases, you've invoked this concept of bodily autonomy, but you also in your opening, I don't want to say conceded, but you granted that a fetus is some kind of life. I don't know if it's a human life or whatever, but it's a life. So then Zen's question is, why does the bodily autonomy of the woman supersede the bodily autonomy of the fetus such that the woman, for convenience sake, can kill the fetus and have that deprive of its right to life? If they both have bodily autonomy, how do you get past that bodily autonomy part of the fetus?
Okay, so essentially the reason why I maintain that argument is simply because we do not essentially know her entire situation, because she might be part of like a abusive relationship, or she might have been part of one where a guy just had sex with her and then just bailed on her. She can't afford it. She also has a number of opportunities. She could have been raped and it came to it, and she got pregnant by that. Even though people say, well, rapes are fairly rare when it comes down to pregnancies, why women get abortions, but it's the fact of the matter is that they still happen. The reason why she has bodily autonomy is because she's going to be the one that's going to be carrying that baby to term. Nobody else is. And if she feels that she is going to be irresponsible by bringing that baby to full term, she has every right to actually terminate that pregnancy. And we can, like I said, we can all argue about why she should just wait, why she can't put her for adoption. But the fact of the matter is, she has every right to terminate that pregnancy at any given point. Now, when it comes down to
for any reason, correct? For any reason,
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me just make sure you're consistent with this position. You said that a woman can get an abortion at any point for any reason, all the way up to birth. Mm-hmm. So, let me just test you here. If a woman gets pregnant consensually, let's say with her husband, it was planned, they planned to get pregnant, they got pregnant, they're financially stable, medically stable, everything's fine. And then 8.5 months in, the husband wants to keep it, but the woman says, never mind, I don't want this anymore. She can go and get an abortion and kill that baby, correct? Or the fetus, the human life. She can go and kill that human life, correct? And that would be fine with you?
She could, but I would leave that between her and the husband. That's something they can actually sort out between the two.
I thought she has bodily autonomy.
Because
The husband should have no say in this matter because she has bodily autonomy, correct?
But this is something they can talk about, actually. This is something that she and the husband can actually talk about.
I've already made it clear.
The
husband.
Okay, moving this forward a little bit. Moving this forward a little bit. Wait. Just wait. So they can quote unquote talk about it, but we're talking about ultimately where does the right to choose rest? So the husband can beg and plead all he wants, but according to you, she should be able to just say, nope, sorry, I'm axing this pregnancy. Right?
Yes.
So yeah.
And you would support that. You would say that was justified. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure you're consistent on that. I think it's a little bit terrifying. It's not exactly optically pleasing even to most of the pro-choice crowd to hear something like that a woman can get an abortion at 8.5 months in, even if she's healthy and financially well off.
Well, do you have historical proof that that's actually taken place, or someone's actually going to go
I don't need
the time most doctors.
You don't need it. No, it's a principled argument. Go ahead.
Okay, what I'm simply saying is the reason why I'm saying is because the option is there. Because I'm saying what you're basically talking about is like a hypothetical situation where a woman can actually at any point, terminate pregnant, which I've maintained consistency on. But what I'm trying to ask is there a situation where a woman has just willy-nilly gone and had an abortion up 8.5 months and the doctor's like, yeah, sure, we'll take care of it? Do you have proof of that ever taking place?
I would imagine just by the law of averages over the course of the however many hundreds of millions of births that have occurred since abortion has been legal in America, it's probably happened. Can I cite a specific example? No, but this is why I said it's a principled argument where in this hypothetical scenario, whether it's happened or not, you would still support that. And in your ideal society, this would be allowed. Like a woman who has a consensual birth or a consensual pregnancy with her husband, planned, financially and medically stable, she can go and have an 8.5 month abortion against the will of her husband. Which is, I think that's just absurd. But we can move on. We don't. I'm just grandstanding that, but we can move on.
Hold on. We're not going to move away from it because the thing is why I bring up. We do not know the situation of the mother. This is the entire point.
I've already presented all the parameters in the hypothetical.
Can I just shoot down? So we don't know the situation. So if I were to ask you, Like, should parents be allowed to eat their children? What would you respond to that with?
Of course not.
Okay, but what if they're in a crashed plane and you've got like a family of 4 that could survive for 1 extra day for a plane to come and save them if they just agree to eat their child?
I think it's kind of an awkward hypothetical scenario, and I'm not really going to accept that, honestly, because the thing is,
wait, hold on. So I can point to historical examples of cannibalism happening when planes crash, right? This does happen. You have to say yes to this, right? If it comes down to eating one person to save 4, then probably, as horrific as it is, like cannibalism has happened. There's a famous movie about at least one plane crash where it's happened.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about like a principled argument, to say that we don't know the situation, well, we do know the situation because it's a hypothetical, right? Yeah. So we're talking about abortions for the sake of convenience. Now, if you want to say we don't know the situation, you're implying that in some situations abortion is okay, and in some situations abortions aren't okay. But it's weird to say that we don't know the situation when you seem to be arguing blanketly to accept all abortions. So why not just argue for the cases that Zen is kind of pushing for? Which are abortions of convenience, basically, right? Even where they can afford it.
Which basically summed up means you've got to justify bodily autonomy, and particularly why is bodily autonomy granted at birth and it's not granted prior. That's my overarching point here is like, why is the birth canal what matters when it comes to bodily autonomy, but you're not granted bodily autonomy prior?
I pretty much explained as to why. I mean, would you like me to try to explain it a different way, maybe?
Let me make the question clear. So 5 minutes before birth, the baby is not granted bodily autonomy, and it can be killed on the grounds of the mother's bodily autonomy. But 5 minutes after birth, the baby now has bodily autonomy, and killing it would be murder. Is that your position? So what happens in this 10-minute window, the 5 minutes prior to birth and the 5 minutes after birth? What happens to allow this baby now bodily autonomy that it didn't have prior, that it didn't have 10 minutes prior?
There was actually apparently there was no medical complications. It wasn't putting the mother at risk. Therefore, it's passed through the birth canal cleanly. No reason to kill it whatsoever. Okay.
But again, you keep appealing to medical necessity. You've done this like you've done this like 3 or 4 times now, and we've already established that I would say it's okay. I would permit a medically necessary abortion. I wouldn't say it's good, but I would permit it. And you would obviously permit it, but we're only talking about less than 1% of all abortions. It's similar to bringing up like the rape scenario, which is again only less than 1% of all abortions. We're leaving out the other 99%. But you still support a non-medically necessary abortion on the grounds of bodily autonomy, but then you just keep appealing to medically necessary abortions. You're not actually defending bodily autonomy, I should say. Because
it sounds like I actually am. It actually sounds like I actually am.
Okay.
Because you keep on bringing up as like, well, wait a second, like it's a non-medical issue and she's not giving birth. But the thing is, like at any given point, we can all agree that a medical necessity can happen at any point. That's my entire point.
Yeah, lightning can strike at any point. But
okay, wait. Let's say that we had medical technology to determine whether 100% of birth was like going to cause a complication or not, and we were able to scan, and in month 6, boom, we know this one 100% won't cause any medical complications. In those cases, would you be okay with the woman like not being allowed to have an abortion, or should she still have the right to have an abortion?
She wouldn't be allowed to have an abortion in the first place, and I would agree with that.
Okay.
Wait, she wouldn't be allowed to have. Or no, I'm asking you, like, if let's say you scanned it and it was like, okay, this baby will be born with no complications at all, and you're financially able to support it, would you deny her right to have an abortion there or not? Like, should she be allowed to have an abortion, or should we say like, no, hold on, you have to you have to carry this baby to term?
If there's no medical complications and it's a perfectly viable baby, I would say yeah, I would, even though I still maintain the position.
You would what?
Force her to carry the baby to term.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
Especially
what happened to but then where's like the bodily autonomy thing?
Again, the bodily autonomy is simply about the whole medical procedure. That's where it's kind of playing into
it. That's why I established a definition at first, where I said it's basically a person's right to self-governance over their own body, free of external coercion or compulsion. That doesn't imply due to medical necessity. That just implies due to personal rights, personal privacy, personal decisions, desires, whatever it may be. It doesn't necessarily have to be medical necessity. But if you're saying you only support abortions due to medical necessity, well then you're basically foregoing bodily autonomy, and you might as well just be pro-life, because you would actually just agree with me if that's the only justification for it. Like, let's just how about a less like a more realistic hypothetical where we can't tell in the future, but let's just say the woman goes to the doctor and let's say she's 6 to 8 months into the pregnancy, and the doctor being like, a well-trained medical professional says there is no sign of any complications here. You appear to be as perfectly healthy as any other pregnancy. There's no real risk of injury or death or whatever. Would she still be allowed to get an abortion given that information from the doctor? Would you still support that? You would?
Yes.
Okay.
I would.
So then why is that any different than the time machine saying 6 months into the pregnancy there's going to be no issues? Like, why can she not get an abortion in this scenario, but in the scenario of the doctor's advice where there's no medical necessity, she can get an abortion?
So we're going back again to like the 10-minute window again between that and the 6 to 8 month pregnancy. Is that what that's it? We're going back to? I just want to make sure we're clear.
Let's just say in both scenarios, like, I mean, the first hypothetical was like, we can tell into the future 100% there's no medical necessity, and you said no abortion in that scenario. Like, if we could tell there's going to be no medical necessity. And then I said, in this other scenario, we're 8 months into the pregnancy and we've got the doctor who's been along the whole ride of the pregnancy. They're at the OBGYN or whatever. And the doctor says, you're perfectly healthy. No real issues here. Baby's in good shape. Everything looks good. No danger. No real danger to speak of. Abortion would be okay in that scenario.
Yes.
Why?
I'm sorry.
Why? Why would it be okay?
Okay, so it would be okay in that scenario because, like, I'd say it's because she still has maintained the full bodily autonomy. But I'm just wondering, it's like, why is she wanting to plan to get the abortion in the first place? Because it's always saying, oh, well, yeah, she's going to have the abortion. Well, why does she want to have the abortion?
I mean, so do you want to talk about like economic needs, or like what do you want to get into here? Like, are you saying like abortion is justified if you're going to be poor, or like what?
Well, that's one of the main reasons as to why, because like economics is a reason for it, because we can just throw out any reason as to why she might actually be wanting to have this abortion in the first place. But, at the same time, the reason why I am asking what is the current situation that she's in is because...
All right, let's say she's poor. Let's say she's poor. Is it justified? Okay. So what? Yeah, because why is that justified?
The reason why it's justified is because in this case, like normally, like an abortion would be a lot cheaper than like actually like raising the child in a extent. Let alone the fact if she doesn't have the economic means to fully raise that child, because she might live in an impoverished district, living somewhere in the backwoods of the United States of America where she cannot actually fully support this baby. And therefore, like, what other options does she have? Is she supposed? What would you expect her to do in that example?
Yeah, I mean, there's two that I can think of. It's either figure it out, make your ends meet by some means, and if you can't, put it up for adoption. But the question,
you want to add another child to the 400,000 children plus that are waiting to be adopted right now.
That's not accurate.
That is accurate, actually.
I mean, maybe if when we're talking about newborns, no, it's not accurate. You might be talking about foster kids, but you can put up newborns for adoption, and they get adopted right away. But
who cares about the other? Who cares about the
other?
No,
that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. But to be clear, you can say that, but it's not. It doesn't matter because it's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
But the point here, because foster kids come from parents that they've already been birthed, and then their parents leave them or go to jail or die or whatever happens. That's what foster care and like orphanages are. But the adoption of newborns, like if you're pregnant and you don't want your child, you can literally like sign up for an adoption facility to take it, and they will take it the day it's birthed, and it will go to a new family the day that it's birthed. Like it's a very quick process because there's so many people on the waiting list. It takes 2 to 3 years to get a newborn if you are seeking to adopt one. But the question I have for you is, would it be your position that a human being is actually better off dead than poor or adopted or fostered? Are they better off dead?
I wouldn't say that they're better off dead, but
then why are we justifying abortion, which is killing them, for these reasons?
Why are we justifying the abortion?
Yeah, for the reason of poverty or adoption or foster care. If they're not better off dead, then in those scenarios, why are you advocating to kill them?
So if a woman is not economically viable to be able to take care of the child, you're okay with the child starving then, correct?
No, I'm not okay with them starving.
Well, it sounds like you are. You're asking me if it's okay to
sound like
kill the child. Well, you're asking me if it's okay to kill the child, but now you're basically implying that it's okay for the child to essentially be left in poverty, to starve, and to be malnourished. I'm not saying
that that's good or ideal, but if the alternative is death, then I'm going to say that struggling through poverty with the potential to maybe get out of it one day is much better than just ending their life. Wouldn't you agree?
It really depends on the circumstance, honestly, because once again,
please do not go here. Please do not
I'm
go.
Actually, there.
You think?
It's funny how you're laughing about because
in what scenario is a human being in poverty better off dead?
I never said that it's better off dead. I'm simply saying that there could be an economic.
Let's say that there's a child that's born and the child is 2 months old, and now the parents realize, holy shit, we're in a ton of fucking poverty. We can't deal with this child. Should they be able to abort the 2-month-old child?
That's not aborting. That's murder. Then
just kill it. Well, should they be allowed to kill it?
Wait. If that's murder, then we go back to our other question. Why does it become murder once it passes through a birth canal? Why is it not murder, 10 minutes earlier?
Because it's still inside the mother's body, essentially.
Is that like the key difference? Like whether it's inside the body or not, is that like because then we can talk about around that if we want.
Yeah, I'll go by that.
So what's when you say inside the mother's body, like what does it matter that it's inside the mother's body? Why is it not allowed like the right to life or right to bodily autonomy? Why is it only permitted this after being birthed?
Because once it leaves the mother's body, you can then agree that it's its own individual person. Wouldn't you say that? Because it no longer needs the mother to sort. Well, why wouldn't you say that?
Wait. Finish your sentence. I'm sorry. Because it what?
Okay. Because once it leaves the mother's body, by that point, it doesn't need to rely upon the mother's body for nutrients and sustenance, correct?
It would still need to rely upon at least another human being to provide for it. Like a 2-month-old or a 2-year-old would need somebody else to be feeding it, clothing it, nurturing it, changing it, all these things. Okay, so it's going to be relying upon somebody else. Go ahead.
But I didn't ask if it's relying on. I'm asking, does it rely upon the mother's body that's providing the sustenance while it's inside the body? Correct. Like that's
yep. And it's but this is where you're gonna have another you're gonna hit another wedge with your principle here. Is that if you're saying like it doesn't have bodily autonomy because it's taking nutrients directly from the mother? Well, that's all happening through what? The umbilical cord. Well, the umbilical cord doesn't get chopped off until after birth. So in order to be consistent with this, you would have to say that bodily autonomy isn't actually granted until the umbilical cord is cut. And up until that point, you could theoretically birth a child and then kill it before cutting the umbilical cord, and that would be justified. It wouldn't be murder.
That's not necessarily, no. Because once that
actually necessarily yes. No, this is the flaw in your argument. Like you have to permit these psychotic things.
Oh yeah, psychotic. Okay, it's funny how you call it psychotic, but anyway.
Yeah. Go ahead and defend it.
Defend what? You didn't make a logical argument.
Okay.
You're basically you're basically saying that once it goes through the birth canal, then we can still kill it by that principle. That's never going to take place. Okay. It's never going to happen.
But to be clear, that's right? I think you're the one that said that once it's out of the body, or once it's no longer reliant on the mother, then that's when it's okay to kill, right?
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, I thought you said.
Okay, so when you say reliant on the mother, what do you mean by that?
What I'm basically saying is like once it's inside the mother, right? Once it's still inside the mother, it's still getting provided all the nutrients and all the, whatever needed to survive, correct? We can agree on that.
Yep.
Okay. So then once it actually starts going through the birthing process, once it passes through the birthing canal, and then once it gets the umbilical cord cut, which happens like immediately afterwards. Once it passes through the birth canal, the umbilical cord is going to get cut like right away. It's going to have its bodily autonomy afterwards, correct?
So that's why I'm saying, I mean, according to you, yes, but that's why I'm saying in theory, you could actually birth a child, not cut the umbilical cord, and then chop the child's head off instead, and that wouldn't
going to happen?
No, hang on.
Is that going to happen?
Is
that going to happen?
The principle
is that going to happen?
It could. What's the contradiction with this occurring? Like, what? How is this?
You need to be realistic in this argument.
Yeah. You're
not being realistic in the argument.
Listen.
You're not being realistic in.
You're trying to stonewall.
Sense.
You're trying to stonewall because you have to bite this bullet and you don't want to. That's what's happening right now.
It's not biting any bullet. You're just not being realistic. Because can you actually point to me a scenario where that actually takes place?
Yeah, I literally walked it through. Like if a mother birthed a child, let's say it's a home birth, so they're not even in a hospital, and instead of cutting the birth canal, let's say the mother's psychotic in the head, she's fucked up in the head, and instead of cutting the umbilical cord, she cuts the baby's head off. Because it was still attached by the umbilical cord, it had not acquired bodily autonomy yet, according to you, by your own lights. And that would not be murder because the mother had the grounds to justify it, which was her own bodily autonomy. Correct?
That's a ridiculous hypothetical, but sure, I'll bite that fucking bullet. I don't care.
Okay, so that would okay. So we've gotten now not just to 8.5 month births, but actually, as long as the umbilical cord hasn't been cut yet, you could still chop the baby's head off.
But here's the thing. It's not a realistic scenario. It's another crazy hypothetical. And this is why I did not want to get into the hypotheticals, because all you're going to do is just keep doing these little games of like,
in every abortion debate, there's going to be hypotheticals, dude.
Well, but these are not realistic hypotheticals, though. If you
what's the okay, so when you say unrealistic, do you mean like it's contradictory? Like, what do you mean?
I'm simply saying that no one's going to birth their baby and then cut its fucking head off. I'm sorry.
I mean,
but like here's like a realistic hypothetical. Somebody gets pregnant and they're just like, I don't think I'm ready for a kid. Like, I mean, I could support it, we could raise it, but we're just not ready for it. And they could have an abortion there. You would defend that?
No. She'd already given birth to the baby?
No. I'm saying that like somebody's like 4 months, 5 months pregnant. They're like, I don't think I don't really feel like having a kid right now. They want to get pregnant. You would support them getting an abortion, even though there's no threat to the mother's life. Yeah. So that. So then let's just talk about that, right?
Okay,
go ahead. I mean, I want to hear some defense from you.
Yeah, I'm just simply saying this because, like, once again, if the mother decides to have the abortion, the baby hasn't really started to take shape yet. It hasn't really started to form yet. Even though people will say that there's the heartbeat bill in regards to that it's like Texas says it's their heartbeat bill, but the baby hasn't really started to take shape yet. Therefore, it's not going to really have any real negative effect. She can still, it's a lot safer for her to have the abortion instead of to carry it to term. There's a couple of situations in regards to that, but that's the only reason why I would say in that regard, yeah, she's free to have that abortion if she wants to, especially if she feels she's not ready to have that child yet.
Right, but the ultimate principle here is it goes back to is if she feels that it's justified, then it is. Like all of the other context is actually irrelevant. And that's why we're so drilled down on bodily autonomy. Like whether it's been fully developed, whether it's developed a heartbeat, whether it's whatever, whether it's got brain function, sentience, whatever it may be, all of that is irrelevant to you because you support mother's decision. It's always about her own decision to have the abortion. As long as she feels that it's justified, then it is.
Yes.
So then going back to the hypothetical that Destiny brought up earlier, which was hang on, it was unrealistic, but it's you still have to humor it. Like if we could by some means have 100% certainty that there would be no medical complications whatsoever in the pregnancy, you said that there should be no abortion in that scenario, but actually, according to your principle, that she still could have one, right?
She still could have one,
and you
but
would
I can
support
still
it.
say she shouldn't have. Yeah,
on what grounds?
I don't think she should have it.
On what grounds? Why shouldn't she?
Because by that point, then like the baby is getting ready to pop out, which is actually something that does take place in the real world, honestly.
Yeah, but it sounds like when for some of the positions that you're kind of getting pushed into, you're basically like pro-life at this point, right?
I'm not pro-life at this point because the pro-life position, everyone says that they are pro-life, but when in fact it's not necessarily about pro-life because every single time they've said, oh yeah, well we want to make sure that the mother is taken care of. We want to make sure that what's it called? If it's like a certain pregnancy, like the ectopic pregnancy and miscarriages and stuff like that, the state of Ohio actually made it to where they actually want doctors to put ectopic pregnancies back in essentially. That doesn't necessarily sound like a pro-life.
There might be some like French people that do, but like I've got conservative friends and family. I've never in my life heard a sane conservative say that we should force women to deliver. Like this Zen dude is like pretty, in my opinion, pretty radical, and I don't think he would even support that position. Like that's an insane position.
It's not. Well,
like I've heard like priests in my school. Like I went to a Catholic high school, and even they said their rationale was always like, we will never, ever, ever be pro-choice. But in the case of like a life's mother being threatened, we're not killing a baby, we're saving a mother. And unfortunately, the cost for that might be the pregnancy. That's just how I've always heard it done. I don't know if there are like like
Well,
Republicans
in
that are
Texas,
clearly saying that like
it's an extremely fringe group that would say like save the baby at all costs, or like no abortion ever, even when it's medically. Like that's an extremely fringe argument that I'm not making. So
yeah, well, the thing is though, is like this is the problem. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is what could actually happen if Roe v. Wade actually gets overturned. Because there was actually a woman that was trying to get an abortion in Texas, and she and her husband were expecting this 20-week-old son to get. But
why don't I just steel man it? Look, dude, look. I'll just steel man it. Even if that were the case, as radical and fringe as that sounds, like if it were the case that it's either 800,000 abortions per year or a few hundred pregnancy deaths that weren't allowed to be terminated, I'll pick the few hundred pregnancy deaths, because that's a few hundred lives versus a few 100,000 lives. I'll just steel man it and say I'd rather that anyway. So this slippery slope you're arguing, I'll just bite the bullet. But that's not my actual position. Like in principle, I would still object to it. But if you give me this dichotomy, I'm still going to bite that bullet and say, all right, fine. If there's no abortions and also no medically necessary terminations, fine. Okay. Then I'll take that. I'll take the latter. But the point I want to get at here is like you're constantly like flip-flopping. You're not willing to actually go to the end of your position when it comes to like if you truly support absolute bodily autonomy for mothers and for everybody, then but then you say that it doesn't begin until it's traveled through the birth canal and the umbilical cord's been cut, then that would mean that abortion is justified at any point, for any reason, even with 100% certainty that there are no medical complications, and there will not be, up until the moment that the birth canal is, or the umbilical cord is cut all the way. You have to be willing to bite that. You have to be willing to bite that bullet that any abortion and any termination of that life would be justified for any reason, even if it's 100% certain that there's no medical complications.
In the absolute unlikelihood scenario of that, right there, of like if you're willing to say if I'm supposed to say, oh yeah, it's going to pass through in the umbilical cord and then yes, they're going to kill it, I'm not going to support that, honestly, just because by that point it's passed through the umbilical cord, and honestly it's still a ridiculous scenario.
Yeah, but you've got no principle. You've got no principle to defend that on. But anyway, let's move. Why is it that now after we cut the umbilical cord that it now has bodily autonomy? Why
after you cut the umbilical cord it now has bodily autonomy
where it didn't prior? Yeah.
It's its own individual baby by that point.
Why?
And then that way they can. Give me why.
Why does that make it its own individual?
Okay, so we have like
it's cut from the mother anyway.
The fact of the matter is, like, we're trying to debate is when does it become a separate entity? So we can't say that now it's a separate entity. We have to say why it's a separate entity, because that's like the whole, like, why. That's literally the subject of the debate, right?
Yeah, and if you ask me,
we both agreed on when it was a separate entity, then we would agree.
Well, the thing is, like, I'm sorry, what was it? Can you say that one more time?
If you both agree that like now this is when it counts as, then you would both agree on everything, right? But clearly we don't, so that's like kind of the subject of the debate, right?
Right. I'm arguing that it's its own individual person at conception. I guess you're arguing that it's its own individual person at the cutting of the birth or the umbilical cord. And I'm happy to defend why conception is what I value, but you're not. You haven't been willing to defend, or that's why I'm asking you right now. Why does cutting the umbilical cord grant somebody their own personhood, their own bodily autonomy, where they didn't have it prior?
Because now they're officially out of the mother's womb, and then once they're cut from their bodily autonomy, they're essentially severed from their mother. Yes.
Okay. I mean, that's just repeating the claim. Like the premise is cutting bodily, like cutting the umbilical cord is what grants somebody bodily autonomy. Why? Well, because we cut the umbilical cord. It's just begging the question. Like why is it that that's what grants you your bodily autonomy? What were you say? Go ahead. Because if the principle is that because they're dependent on the mother, well, they're still going to be dependent on the mother or some other person afterward. Like a 1 day old infant baby, newborn baby, can't sustain itself without somebody else's assistance. So you could argue like that they need to be supported by somebody else. Would they still not have bodily autonomy then? Like kill an infant?
They do have bodily. No, they have bodily autonomy by then.
Why?
What do you mean why?
Why did they get it at that point? Why did they get it when they're 1 day old outside the womb, but they didn't have it prior? That's what I want to know.
Talking in circles.
For everybody listening and watching this back, this is why the bodily autonomy argument is so bad for pro-choice. Like, you really need to rethink your position if this is what you support. Because this is where it leads you. It leads you to either massive contradictions or just absurd conclusions. So,
if that's what you think.
I'm grandstanding right now because you're not giving a coherent argument.
I've given a coherent. Okay, if you don't like the argument, that's just too bad. Okay, anyway, if you want to move on to something else, we can do so.
Well, I mean,
because all we're gonna do is just listen. All we're gonna do is just talk in circles, and you're just gonna want to continue to talk about definitions and principles.
We're not in a circular. Well, this isn't circular. We're actually at a sticking point.
Because you've asked me this question 3 fucking times, sir.
We're at a sticking point right now. Actually, it's not a circuit. It's not circular. It's a sticking point where you have drawn your line. You say bodily autonomy is granted for a human being once it has traveled through the birth canal and the umbilical cord has been cut. Mm-hmm. I'm asking you, why is that the point that you get bodily autonomy where you did not have it prior?
Simply put, because like once it's passed through the birth canal, once the umbilical cord has been cut, yes, it's going to need to rely on the mother, but by that point, it's already its own individual. It's its own person, individual, gets a social security card, the whole 9 yards. That's okay. So I'm not saying like the social security.
Okay, yeah, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that either.
Process. I'm saying it's just like how the process goes. So
okay, let me ask you this: if a woman, let's say a woman is pregnant, and she's 8 months into the pregnancy. And a criminal comes along and shoots her in the stomach. She does not die. She's injured. She does not die, but the fetus, the human inside of her, does die. Is that murder?
Yeah.
That is murder.
Yes.
Okay.
Wait, how?
How is that murder if it's not its own person yet?
It could be declared as murder. Well, first off, if somebody gets shot in the belly, that's not a medical procedure, is it?
Well, like, what are we murdering? Murdering usually refers to the unjust taking of a life, right?
Killing of a person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're gonna go on the assumption that the mother wanted the life, correct?
Is that the difference of whether you are counted as a life or not? As if somebody wants you to be counted as a life?
Sure, I can take that.
Well, but okay,
it's a slippery slope because that would make.
I mean, I don't think we agree with this because, like, what if you say, "I don't think my 1-year-old is alive"? Listen, I've got a son, and there are times where I wanted to kill him as a 2-year-old. So I don't know if that should necessarily be a legal thing or a morally acceptable thing. Okay.
I think because basically what you're proposing here, Alex, is that the value of a life or the existence of a life and the legal proceedings that would follow from that is entirely subjective in terms of, like, is this murder or is this not? And yeah, it would follow that, like, if I have a 1-year-old or if there's just a random guy on the street and I decide I wanted to kill him, well, as long as I don't acknowledge that as a life, it's not murder. Or if I don't acknowledge that as a person, it's not murder because it's entirely arbitrary. If it's solely based on
murder me though, you can't murder you. Maybe I misunderstood what Destiny was asking me. Maybe I just kind of misunderstood. So could you like re-ask the question again, Destiny?
Well, so what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to figure out like really this is what all the abortion debate is about. It's like when does the fetus become like a person that has rights that are granted to it? So there are multiple points, but many pro-lifers will say at the moment of conception, this has become a person that is endowed with some sort of like moral consideration, such that if you want to kill it, you have to have a really good reason to. Generally, the only reason is that it's a threat to the mother's life. Now, if you want to take the pro-choice side, you have to do one of two things. You either, one, this is the very difficult argument. It's kind of the one that you're trying to take. You have to say, yeah, sure, it's a life, but we can kill it anyway because reasons that don't involve the life of the mother, which is a really hard argument to make. You could make it, but you have to be almost sociopathic to get there. And the second one, the more common route, is usually saying, well, I don't actually consider this a life worth protecting until some other point in time. Some people will say consciousness / sentience or other points of time. Implantation is one I've heard to get some birth control excuse, but we have to pick like one path here. If you're going to argue just autonomy, then you've almost granted that the fetus is a person that probably should have rights, but the autonomy of the mother, for some reason, her convenience outweighs the right of the life of the child. So that's we're just trying to figure out like where, like why, what do you define a fetus? Like when is a fetus somebody that's worthy of moral consideration to you? That's what we're trying to figure out, or what Zen is trying to figure out, so they can attack.
Okay, that makes better sense. Okay, so in this argument, just for the sake of debating, I would definitely say that like once the baby does leave the birth canal, I would say that I wouldn't say it's. How do I word this? I would say that the baby, once it's left the birth canal.
Sure, and then just to go one step further, because any argument that you give, what you're going to have to think, because this is what Zen is going to ask you, is any position you give, he's going to say, can you show me the meaningful difference between this thing now and 5 minutes earlier? He's going to ask, like, and that's where you got to the umbilical cord thing before. Let's say that it's birthed, and like right when the baby comes out, let's say the mother's like, okay, I have a mixed husband, I'm mixed, I want a black baby or a white baby. Let's say the mother waits until the baby comes out and she sees it and she's like, fuck, it's not the color that I want, but we haven't disconnected the umbilical cord yet, so we're just gonna like cut its head off right now. Like, arguably, principally, you've kind of asserted that that's an okay position because the umbilical cord is still connected. Or maybe we even are more extreme. Maybe the doctor like opens her up, the cervix is dilated, she's like, oh shit, he's got a, this color foot, is that okay? And she's like, no, fuck, abort him now. So the question is always going to be, go back 10 minutes from your establishing area and say, like, why is this now the moment when it's alive, but 10 minutes before, it was just a thing? And that's going to be a logical argument, and it can be an emotional argument, because if you take a baby out of a mother's body 10 minutes early, for all intents and purposes, fuck, you can have like 4th month babies born now that are like viable and shit. Like, it's going to look like pretty human, right? So that's
like really
the next part of the argument. Yeah. So at birth is a really difficult argument to defend, but go for it.
You have the floor.
You could definitely say it's probably. Good. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I was about to say something, but anyway, like in this regard, like for example, why is it like more important if the baby, like before the baby travels through, why is it that she's able to kill it? Well, first off, I wouldn't say that she's actually going to. I have yet to hear of a situation where that actually takes place. And if I was to maintain the moral consistency that saying that she has every right to terminate the pregnancy, I'd simply say it's based upon like the medical necessity, essentially. But should she terminate the pregnancy? Does she have the right to terminate the pregnancy? I don't see it taking place in that regard. I don't know. It's kind of a tough question, honestly, in regards to that, or the more I'm thinking about it.
Well, it's because
I still say that she.
Dude, it's because the conclusion is that those scenarios that Destiny just brought up about like, oh, I don't like the color of its foot, or I don't like, I wanted a black baby or I wanted a white baby. No, it's a hypothetical though. Like in a scenario where that was like some psychotic mother was like, I need a white baby or a black baby, I don't accept mixed babies. And then they have a mixed baby and like, fuck, well, we haven't cut the umbilical cord yet, stab it. Like that could, in theory, happen. Hypothetically, that could happen. And according to you, that would be morally justified. With your given principles, it would have to be.
In a real world scenario, that's never going to happen. A doctor's never going to do it.
Well, I mean, let's just say the mother wanted to do it. Let's say the mother, because the doctor is just a, like a third party here.
I don't think a doctor is actually going to allow something like that to take place.
No, but it doesn't. Okay, well, hang on. Now you're infringing upon the mother's bodily autonomy. Why does the doctor get to do that?
Because like once the baby leaves the birth canal, then once it has the bodily autonomy, baby could then
the umbilical cord hasn't been cut yet. It hasn't acquired bodily autonomy yet. That's the point here, dude.
Okay.
So you understand, like you would have to support this in your worldview.
Okay.
Okay. And then, but that's why I'm asking you, why is it that, okay, now we've cut the umbilical cord and 5 minutes have passed. This baby has bodily autonomy, and doing the exact same action to it 5 minutes earlier would have been justified, but now it is not. So what is the significance here in terms of cutting the birth canal?
Birth canal or
cutting the umbilical cord. Sorry, I don't know why I keep messing.
It's okay.
Cutting the umbilical cord.
It happens. It happens. No, it's okay. It happens. Well, like I said, the only reason why I say once again, and it's something we've already pretty much agreed upon, because like at any given point, I just look at it as a medical scenario. But in the principle of the matter of if she can just do it at any time, like for example, like she should be like we're saying 5 minutes before birth, should she be allowed to have an abortion? I don't think it's ever going to take place, honestly, because of like.
You can't keep dodge. That answer is a dodge. That's a dodge. You understand that?
It's not a dodge. It's a realistic scenario.
It is a dodge.
It's very real. Just because you don't like the answer because it's based on medical fact, I'm sorry.
Well, so I think that answer is an okay answer, but it just depends on the debate that we're having. So if we were to have a debate on what are the probable outcomes of any given law, then I think that we can say like, well, this probably won't happen that much of this. But right now we're having a debate on the principles of when we ought to be allowed to abort somebody. So in a principled argument, we should be able to accept every scenario downstream from whatever moral assertion we make. If we want to carve out exceptions, then we can carve out exceptions. That's fine. But we have to account for it somehow rather than just saying that probably won't happen. Because chances are, this is a country of 330 million people. If it can happen legally, it probably will happen at some point. It might be rare, but it'll happen. And your position argues in defense of these particular things happening, right? So Zen doesn't even have to argue that this will happen. He would just have to argue that like you would allow it to happen. And that's your position. You might say like, well, I don't think this will happen, but you have to say like, but I mean, if it did, I'd be okay with it. That would be the
talk about like the 5 minutes all the way up until birth, essentially.
Yeah.
No, that's not necessarily my position. The reason why I say a woman should be allowed to all the way up until birth, once again, that's just like because of the medical situation. That's where I'm going to leave it at.
Okay, going back to I guess just grandstanding the dodge. I don't know what to tell you, bro. Like you gotta be willing to bite this bullet. I mean, there's scenarios you could put me in, force me to bite bullets, but you haven't done that. When I do it to you, you're not willing to actually do it. You just start dodging. I don't think we can go anywhere.
It's not based on reality. That's the reason why.
Well, I think that for arguing pro-choice, I think that if you grant that the fetus is something that is like living and alive as much as like a baby or whatever, but the mother can have an abortion anyway, you're in like a very, very treacherous territory. Like you're gonna have to bite so many unbelievable bullets. It's gonna be like you're gonna be insane by the end of that conversation, I think. You'll find people that will use similar arguments to justify abortion up until kids are like 2 years old. I think Peter Singer might, I think in a paper, I'd have to go look, but like you get into really crazy points. I think that generally for pro-choice, you want to have some delineation between when does a fetus become a protected thing versus when is it not. So like somebody like me, I would say that like prior to a conscious experience existing, you have nothing worth defending because you can't even conceive of defending an unconscious thing or something that hasn't even had consciousness yet, right? And then you can start to fight around like that line, and then you can get into more difficult scenarios where you're putting the other person on like, okay, well, would you protect indefinitely like a comatose person's life? And then you have to force them to protect potential life, and then you got to force them to say, well, what is a potential life? And you get into more things there. But if you've already granted like, okay, fine, like, yeah, it's a person, it's a human, but bodily autonomy. I know that like bodily autonomy is a thing that people scream about all the time, but it's really the worst way to ever justify abortion because it's just such a dog shit argument. I mean, like, let's say we go to an area before formula exists. You're threatening the bodily autonomy of a mother up until, I should know this, but how old is a baby when they stop formula feeding or when they stop breastfeeding? It's like 1 year.
1 to 2 years.
I have no idea.
Yeah, so like babies are literally, and that's kind of a painful process. You got to fucking pump milk out of your boobs if you're not feeding continuously. Like your nipples can chafe because the baby will be whatever. So like technically babies are dependent on mothers' bodies absent formula up until, like 12 to 18 months. Like that can be a pretty shitty part. Like would we abort like a 6-month-old baby because the mother doesn't want to be a slave to the child anymore?
Yeah, it would be the same principle as the umbilical cord. I mean, the attachment is not through the umbilical cord; it's just through the nipple. I mean, it's the same. It's the same principle in that. And yeah, a time before formula, or a time before bottles existed, where you could actually store the milk. And yeah, the mother's bodily autonomy is being violated as long as the baby is sucking on her nipple. Like, and you could kill that. I guess you could kill the baby as long as it's breastfeeding. I mean, it's
because breastfeeding is a natural process that a mother is providing sustenance to the baby, isn't it?
So is the umbilical cord and the baby in the womb. It's a natural process. So, what's the difference? There isn't one. The answer is that there isn't one, because this is another aspect of the argument that just falls flat on its face. Because you just present another, and this one's a very realistic scenario. Present another very realistic scenario where the premises don't hold up and follow through to the conclusion, and now you're out. Now you're out of your argument. You're bankrupt. It's over, dude.
Okay.
I think I've said all I need to say. That's it.
What's the next topic then?
That's all I got.
So it's just bodily autonomy.
Well,
that's all you want to talk about is just bodily autonomy.
Well, no, if you still have an argument, if you still have an argument for why you would support abortion or pro-choice or whatever, then I'm all ears. But I think that your bodily autonomy principle has been exhausted. So if you want to move on to a new argument, you can. Go ahead, or we can be done. I don't care.
Did you guys watch Everything Everywhere All at Once?
I'm sorry?
A good movie. Never mind.
I don't watch movies.
Never. How come?
I'm just not into
curious.
it. Hollywood is ran by liberals.
Pretty true. I'm way too red pilled for movies. Bro.
So one of the questions I'd like to ask though is like, so basically, I've heard you make the position before that you do not support, like, okay, medical situation aside, are you saying that there's no other situation into which a woman should ever have an abortion ever?
Correct.
What about rape?
Yeah, correct.
Why should she be forced to give birth if she's been raped?
Yeah, because the human inside of the womb did not commit the rape. The human being inside of the mother is still, by all intents and purposes, not guilty or innocent, in other words. So the only real argument you would have if you say abortion is justified in the case of rape, but not otherwise or whatever, is that the crime that the father commits, the rape that the father commits, the human that is created as a result should be punished for that by way of death. And like an equivalent analogy would, like, in order to be consistent in this principle of essentially intergenerational punishment, you would have to say that if a father robbed a bank, then a child that had nothing to do with it should go to jail for that. But if you would oppose that, you would also oppose killing a human being simply because its father raped its mother. So that's why I'm opposed to abortions, even in the case of rape, because you shouldn't punish an innocent human for the crime of their father.
So regardless of the emotional scarring that the woman's going to go through, now you're going to force her to carry that baby to term.
Keep in mind, real quick, just before we run down all these arguments, right? You're going to have to find something. If you've already conceded that the fetus is alive, you're going to have to give a level of discomfort that's so great that the mother's allowed to kill somebody to alleviate that discomfort. That you're setting an almost impossible hurdle to overcome. It's going to be very, 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 very high. Like, because you can list a whole bunch of things like, well, it's going to be traumatic, sure. Well, it could be uncomfortable, painful to have a pregnancy, sure. It's going to be like, struggling to deal with postpartum, sure. But like, we would never use any of these excuses to kill a 1-year-old, right? So that's you're setting yourself up to where you have a massive threshold to overcome, and no amount of like discomfort from the mother generally is going to get you to that. Okay, fuck it, we should be able to kill the kid.
Well, she should still be given the option. Essentially, because here's the thing. The reason why I bring up this argument, though, is because if a 13-year-old girl gets impregnated by her grandfather, you're saying she has to carry that baby to term.
Yes, that's what everybody, yes.
A pro-lifer is going to say yes.
If you want to give them the most uncomfortable thing, even if like a 13-year-old person was raped by their 62-year-old grandfather, like a pro-lifer would say, yeah, they have to carry it to term.
Why?
They would say, it's horrible.
Don't tell me it's because like the child is not guilty of the innocent.
So that's the reason.
I want you to give me that's not.
Go ahead. What do you want? What do you want to hear?
Go ahead. No. I want you to give me a better reason in regards to that, because you're basically condemning a 13-year-old girl to mother. That's kind of a little screwed up, don't you?
Well, I don't think.
But he would agree that it is screwed up. But he would say that it is screwed up. But it was the grandfather's sin. It's not the girl's problem. Like, that's the issue, right?
I mean, it is her problem.
Because you're enacting a crime, or not? You're not enacting a crime. You're enacting a punishment for the behavior of the impregnator on the child. Now, if like the thing is that in Zen's world, he would actually agree with everything you're saying. There should be a murder punishment potentially for that rape, but it wouldn't be for the child; it'd be for the rapist. That might but the responsibility is being shifted though, depending on who's, I guess, which side of the argument you're addressing.
Yeah, like let me ask you this, Alex: do you support the death penalty for rape? Like for somebody to rape, if I raped a girl, should I get the death penalty?
I'm kind of like shifty on the death penalty. I usually reserve death penalty for like excessive murder and stuff like that.
Okay, so you're unsure of whether the death penalty is justified in for the rapist, but you're certain that the death penalty is justified for the rapist's offspring that had nothing to do with the rape itself, right? Is that correct?
I don't consider the death penalty for the fetus inside the. The reason why I'm bringing up this argument, though.
Well, that's what it would be. That's what an abortion would be. Is that if you rape somebody and a human being is created, that human is now to be put to death for your actions. So you support essentially the death penalty for an innocent human that is the byproduct of rape, but not for the rapist itself.
And you're perfectly content with a 13-year-old girl being raped and being forced to carry a child to term.
Perfectly content with that.
Just to make sure
so, just to make sure we're clear. You said
you're willing
you want me to be clear?
You want me to be clear? Raped by their grandfather.
No, I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with a.
It sounds like you are, though.
Hang on, listen, dude.
It sounds like you are.
Okay, you want me to explain?
It sounds like. Go ahead.
So
go ahead. Explain.
I'm not okay with grandfathers raping their granddaughters or anybody raping anybody for that matter. That's awful, and that's a crime that should arguably be punished by way of death. It would be very situational, but arguably there's an argument for why rapists should be put to death, or at the very least put in prison for a long time, if not life. But
long time, I agree.
So rape is awful. Don't need to really elaborate on that. Rape bad. Everybody agrees. But if a human is created as a result, that doesn't mean we ought kill them. We should, in fact, I would actually argue that a human that is created as a product of rape should not be killed. They should be given an opportunity to be a better man than their father was, who raped their mother. Right?
Would you be willing to say that to a rape victim?
Yes.
Who's pregnant?
I don't think you would. We can think of another example. Let's say that you have let's say that you've got a poor family. Okay, mother and dad are taxed 100%. They don't have time for anything. Let's say that horrible parents show up at the doorstep and they drop off a 2-month-old child. They drop it off on the doorstep. They knock on the door and the 13-year-old answers and they say, "Hey, this is our 1-month-old child. You have to take care of this kid." Do you think that the 13-year-old, now the 13-year-old has two options. The 13-year-old can say, "This is really fucked up. You've dealt me a horrible fucking hand. Now I have to take this kid in and I've got to raise it, like, fuck me." Or the 13-year-old can say, "Fuck this," and then step on the kid's head and throw it in the trash can. Do you think that the 13-year-old should be able to just squish the kid, throw it in the trash can, and then move on? Or do you think that even though it's a horrible situation, which somebody else has put her in, it would still be morally wrong to just squash the baby's head and throw it in the trash can?
For a 1-month-old? Yes, absolutely. But we're not talking about. But then
the question is, so now I'm going to throw all the same moral condemnation your way. I'm going to say you would force a 12-year-old to raise a 1-month-old child. She's trying to go to school. You're telling her that her parents can't help. She's got to go through all the financial difficulties. Why doesn't she have the option to squish the head and just toss it in the trash can? It's not her fault that the other people dropped the baby off at the house.
Well, of course, then I would ask the question: why can't those people take care of the family? I mean, why are they dropping? Why are they picking this 12-year-old girl? I mean, that's
well, but they already did. That's the thing. But why did the grandpa rape the girl? Right? The crime's already been committed. That's the issue.
I don't really consider the situations the same, honestly.
No. Totally here's the analogy.
Basically, somebody is forced to force the situation. I hear the 12-year-old, but now the 12-year-old. Now it's like, well, what do we do? Who do we punish? Well, we kill the kid because the 12-year-old is highly, highly, highly inconvenienced. Which I agree, she is, and it's horrible. But like, where does the punishment lie, right?
But the only reason I have a problem with that is because, like, for example, like, we're talking about a 13-year-old girl that's been raped by her grandfather. She's now being told she has to carry that baby to term. How can we actually justify something like that and tell her, yes, you have to carry that baby to term, when she already has enough trauma to deal with in regards to this? She also has to go to counseling. She has to go to get treatment. Now she has to be forced to carry a baby to term, a constant reminder of everything that she's ever gone through. We're basically saying
like, in order to avoid all this issue, we just kill a kid.
In that case, absolutely.
Okay, but then why are you so opposed to like the hypothetical with the baby that's dropped off at the porch, right? We just kill a kid and then we're good. We don't have to worry about it.
You could say all the same things you just said. Like, she has to carry it around. She has to deal with it. She has to be reminded of this horrible occurrence that left her in, in a position where she has to raise a child.
Though. It's an outrageous hypothetical, though, because, like, for example, if
everything's an outrageous hypothetical when you don't want to be consistent, dude. You got to stop dodging. You either need to be consistent and say it's okay to squash the 2-month-old, or that it's not okay to kill either.
I'm saying I'm being more of a realist in scenarios like this. I mean, if this is all we're going to do is just do hypotheticals, okay, fine, whatever. So
that's what. Look, dude, all abortion debates, any real abortion debate is almost always going to contain hypothetical scenarios, because you have to provide analogies in order to make the argument, like on one side or the other. Whether you're making
wouldn't you say
good.
Doesn't a hypothetical usually have to have some level of realism? Of
Yeah,
like
yeah. No, I'm fully on board with rejecting.
Wait. To be clear, a hypothetical doesn't have to be a realistic thing at all. All a hypothetical has to do is express whatever moral principles another situation is trying to say. So, like, let's say somebody says, like, I should be able to punch you in the face for any reason. I could construct a hypothetical where I say, okay, I think that a guy named Zordon should be able to fire a light beam laser express at another guy named Zippel in the face just because he didn't like the way that a star like revolved around the sun or something, right? Like I could say some shit like that, and as long as the general principle, even though that hypothetical is absurd, as long as all the principles are there, it still works as a hypothetical. Hypothetical situations don't have to be realistic ones. That's why they're hypotheticals instead of examples, right? Or instead of like real anecdotes or whatever.
Unless the only other like
maybe I'm more of a realist.
I would also put the condition that it needs to be like logically possible or logically.
Well, sure, but as long as the moral principles are consistent, it ought to be
right.
logically possible.
No, yeah, I agree with that. I agree. But
we're
like,
not talking about like, should somebody be able to have an abortion like in the future? Should I be able to like preemptively have an abortion because I can read the future? Right? We don't know any, like that's not what's being discussed. Everything that's being discussed, I think, is pretty reasonable. Like there have been people that have left babies on doorsteps. That's not an unknown thing or unheard thing. It happens with cats and dogs. It happens with babies sometimes. People get raped. That happens. People have third trimester abortions. It does happen in some places in the U.S. as much as some people don't like it. But people have abortions because of convenience, right? That happens as well, right?
Yeah, but 91% of those abortions out of convenience take place in the first trimester.
That doesn't matter though, because you support them. You support all of them, all scenarios. It doesn't matter. Like this is why we honestly shouldn't have moved past bodily autonomy. But I mean, it was good. It was good to flesh out the whole like rape scenario, things like that. But like when your principle hinges on bodily autonomy, then you're necessarily going to be supporting every single abortion that has ever occurred and will ever occur on the grounds of bodily autonomy. But you weren't able to defend that consistently to its conclusion. So that's really where I think the debate ended. That's why I was like, well, there's not much else I need to say because we've reached the end where the bodily autonomy argument falls. It does. Even, Destiny's pro-choice and he's even explaining this to you. So like, I don't know what to tell you. Dude.
I just think, like I said before, bodily autonomy is really hard because once you've granted that the fetus is like a living thing, you're in a really crazy world of trying to argue. You're gonna have to get into some crazy philosophy, something to justify that.
All right, that's what we want to look at. Okay.
All right. Well, I think I'm good on this subject. I mean, what you got? Anything else, Alex? You got any other lines you want to try to throw out?
It's not really going to matter because all you're going to do is just say, oh yeah, it's bad, but she still has to go through with it anyway because who cares about her, right?
No, that's not what I would say. But I would say don't kill the innocent human. You said that you would actually be willing to tell a 13-year-old girl who was raped that she has to carry that body to term, which I think is absolutely deplorable. Wow, sorry you feel that way.
The moral condemnation from the religious person goes right back at you. You're going to say because of the abhorrent actions of a older person raping a 12-year-old, now you're going to compound that horribleness and murder an innocent child because of it, right? Like the moral condemnation goes both ways depending on your perspective. Like the religious person could just as easily say like we've already got one fucking horrible crime that like a minor was raped. Now you want to add like a murder on top of that?
But again, I wouldn't necessarily classify it as murder.
Call it murder.
We've pretty much gone in circles.
Right.
Either way, let me ask one last question. Again, does aborting a child, does it undo the rape itself?
Of course not.
Okay. And are you aware that there is a thing called like post-abortion stress syndrome? It's similar to like a PTSD type thing where a mother that aborts her child has like regret, depression, sometimes medical issues like internal bleeding or whatever. Like you can get that from pregnancy too. You can get that from pregnancy too. Actually, yes, you can. You can, but the thing is, I would say the steel man. I would argue that the abortion, the post-abortion stress is worse than postpartum stress. But the steel man is hang on. The steel man here, that way we don't have to go to like studies, is that they are comparable. They are similar, and one is not going to be significantly better or worse than the other. I'll just grant that as the steel man here. So the abortion doesn't solve the problem. All it does is kill a human being, whether it's because of rape or any other reason.
But the reason why is she should have that right to do so because something was done to her against her will. And now you're basically justifying that she has to carry that to term because of some righteous bit about, oh, well, it's a baby. You should have to be forced to carry it to term. And that's
but like, again, like imagine,
that's to me, that's immorally wrong.
You got to be careful because this moral condemnation can go both ways. Like this guy would say like, hey, like you would point to every single like 20, 30, 40-year-old that was the child of rape and go, you didn't deserve to live. You should have been murdered. You should have been killed in the womb. You should be dead. Like it's disgusting that you're even alive. Like that's what you're essentially
saying. I mean, like let's test that. Would you say that a human being is better off dead than to be the product of rape?
Would I say that it's better off dead than to be the product of rape?
Yeah.
I would say like if the child found out like how they were conceived. Like honestly, you know what? Yeah, I'll bite that bullet, honestly.
Oh, that's so okay, so in your worldview, every single person, like if we could determine every single human being that was conceived due to a rape, we should round them up and kill them because they are better off dead, according to you, right? If you had the keys, let's say hang on. That's why I'm asking you.
Okay,
I'm
I want
asking
you to understand something.
Hang on, stop spurging. Stop, don't spurg out, dude. Don't spurg out. Listen, if you had the keys to the city here, you're the executioner here. You've got the keys to the city, and we're able to go up and round up every human being that's ever been conceived of rape. According to you, they are better off dead. So then if you had the keys to the city here, you would kill them, right? You would kill every single person that's conceived of rape.
Nope.
Okay, then you're contradicting one or more principles here.
So here's the thing.
For like the third or fourth time.
Okay, sir, what I'm trying to say is that I'm saying that the woman, if she is raped, she has the absolute right to terminate that pregnancy. If she decides to keep that baby, she has every right to do so. But that's a pretty consistent argument, wouldn't you say?
Listen,
that is a consistent argument.
Okay, so I'm just gonna you don't have to correct it. I don't think you're gonna be willing to, but you conceded unequivocally when I asked you, is a human being better off dead than to be conceived of rape? You unequivocally bit that bullet and said yes. So it would follow that if every human being... Okay, then I'll ask it again.
Maybe I misunderstood your question.
I will re-ask the question. Is it your position that a human being is better off dead than to be conceived of rape?
No. I would say that it...
So then what's the argument for killing them in the case of rape? What's the argument for the abortion in the case of rape? Bodily autonomy?
No, I'm simply saying that the woman has every right to do so because if she does not want
bodily
to carry
autonomy.
That child...
Okay, so you're going back to bodily autonomy. Do you see how it comes full circle? It comes back to bodily autonomy, which has already fallen flat multiple times. We don't need to continue, dude. You're done. You're bankrupt.
Not bankrupt. I simply made a consistent argument, and you just tried to like twist it around and shit like that. So that's cool. I mean, if you just want to run away from it, cool.
I'm not running.
We've gotten to the end here.
Yeah.
You're definitely running because you don't have a moral ground to stand on. You said that you would be okay with telling a 13-year-old girl that
I will. I'll
get the baby.
Okay, are you done? Why don't you give your closing thoughts? I'll give my closing and then we can end it. Okay.
I really don't think we have much of a closing argument. I'll just simply say is that I thought we were going to talk more about like Roe v. Wade, but instead we just kind of got into a argument about bodily autonomy, and we just got into the definitions game and a series of hypothetical situations. I thought there was actually a lot more to it, but he's obviously not wanting to talk more about it, so we'll just close it out from there.
Okay, and I think I defended my position for what it's worth pretty clearly and consistently. I'll make the argument one last time that was not attacked, is that human life begins at conception. Abortions are killing an innocent human life by definition. That is murder. That is wrong. I'm consistent in that across the board. Alex is not, because he proposes bodily autonomy beginning at the moment of birth or cutting the umbilical cord. Is this position he was not willing to be consistent in and bite all the bullets in. He brought up other justifications that ultimately fell flat, like economic hardship, rape, and other things like. And ultimately, like I said, I was consistent. I said even in the case of rape, an innocent human should not be punished for a crime their father commits. And I have to emphasize this to anybody listening, to anybody that heard this whole debate. This is why you do not make the bodily autonomy argument for the pro-choice position. Even Destiny, who was modding the debate, I do think he was debating a little bit in my favor, but I think he was relatively fair throughout. Even Destiny was acknowledging like this is why the bodily autonomy argument sucks, because you're gonna have to bite some severe bullets, or you're just gonna be inconsistent. The argument's gonna fall apart. So that's all I got. I appreciate you having me on, Destiny. I appreciate the moderation, Alex. It was a relatively civil conversation. As much as I disagree with you, I do appreciate the civility. That's it.
Yep. I feel like, even if we disagree on things, I believe in civility. I don't think we gain anything by lobbing insults at each other, which I don't think I lobbed any insults, did I?
Nope. I think it was totally fair.
Okay.
And I don't get offended. Well, I don't get offended at stuff like that anyway.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure that, we at least had a civil discussion, and that's all that really matters. So
yeah,
if we want to have another debate sometime, I'm always game for it. So.
Yeah. And just a quick shout out for myself. I'm Zen Shapiro. If you guys enjoyed the conversation, you can find me on Twitter and YouTube. Just search up Zen Shapiro, just like Ben Shapiro with a Z. Also the in-house right-wing debater on the Crucible YouTube channel. So you guys can find me there if you want to see more of my content. And again, Destiny, I appreciate it. So.
Mask off, I promise they don't help. If I saw my son in the dress, then I'll go and get my belt. Look in the mirror and tell me what you think about yourself. You need a safe space. Sorry, I don't care about what you feel. I'm about to break the meter. Two-way got my heat up. Hey, I don't wear Nike. I only